It's official. Disney doesn't know how to write movies anymore. Because it's just obvious after seeing Mufasa, which I just saw, and it's got some very glaring issues. It's directed by Barry Jenkins, who directed Moonlight, so he should know what he's doing, generally. But there's two major issues with the entirety of this movie. One of them I'll get into a little bit later, but the main one that is present throughout the entirety is that it doesn't know how to set up or establish anything. Any event or relationship that happens throughout the entirety of this movie just happens. It isn't set up in any way, shape, or form. There is no lead-in. There's no conversation that builds. It just happens back to back. And since there's no proper establishment of situations or characters or relationships, we don't care about anything throughout the entirety of this movie. The audience is given no reason or no attachment to anything that's going on, other than the fact that they're relying on us having some nostalgia for the original movies. It's like they took a story and wrote the outline for it with all the important beats, and then they didn't fill in anything in between, so they just kind of focused on the important bits, but didn't make us care about any of them because they didn't fill in any of the gaps. And that's probably due to either the studio or the lead writer, because the lead writer on this movie is Jeff Nathanson. And from what I dove into on his IMDb, he's only been the lead writer on two other projects, Rush Hour 3 and Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales. So I'm not entirely surprised he kind of dropped the ball on this one. I mean, the entire movie is a retelling by Rafiki, the baboon or whatever kind of monkey he is, to Simba's daughter, Kiara. And Kiara is voiced by Blue Ivy Carter, aka Beyonce's daughter, because I'm guessing that Beyonce just wanted her to get her SAG card as soon as possible. But Rafiki's telling the story of Mufasa, and it starts off with Mufasa and his parents with zero establishment as to their relationship or anything that's going on or where they are or anything. And then it's just, hey, they're in a part of Africa where there's a drought going on, and all of a sudden there's some rain, so let's go get some water. And then that rain's a little too strong, and so Mufasa's caught in the middle of it, and they basically reenact this scene where there's the stampede that killed Mufasa, but they do it with a flash flood / surge of water, endangering Mufasa's dad, and Mufasa's mom is trying to reach out for him, and Mufasa gets swept away by a giant current and then is found much further downstream by Taka. And of course, we know that Taka is going to be Scar later on. Taka saves Mufasa and is immediately like, hey, we're best friends. We're brothers now. No setup to the relationship whatsoever. They don't spend any time on it. It is just, hey, I saved you. We're best friends. We're brothers. Cool, right? No effort put in whatsoever into developing the characters or the backstory or anything. Then we're introduced to Taka's dad. And by introduced, I mean he just shows up because we don't actually get any backstory or any sort of context to him at all. But Taka's dad is apparently a king, and he just wants Taka to be primed to be the next king, and he doesn't like outsiders, so he's like, no, we're gonna kill Mufasa. There's the smallest objection imaginable, and then he's like, all right, fine, race Taka, my son, and if you win, you get to live. But even during this conversation, he tries to call out that Mufasa's name means king, so we should be especially wary of him, which is weird to hear from Taka's dad, because Taka in Swahili literally means garbage. So if the guy cares so much about names, maybe he shouldn't have named his son Garbage. But anyways, of course, Mufasa wins the race, but the king isn't super happy about it. So he's like, fine, you can live, but go live with the females. We don't want to deal with you. They grow up a little bit, which also has no real establishment of relationships or characters. It just happens. And then while Mufasa is out hunting with Taka's mom, we get shown that Mufasa has special super powered senses. Like he can smell and feel some prey that are further away than most other people can detect, which is super random, but whatever. Any protagonist in a Disney movie has to have superpowers now because that's what they did with Mulan. While they're out hunting, a bunch of white lions wind up attacking Mufasa and Taka's mom. And that's slightly ironic because Disney was accused of copying Kimba the White Lion when it comes to their original Lion King movie. Even though I don't know how much merit that actually has, but the fact that the white lions are the ones that are the enemies, I find slightly ironic because of that. Simba winds up fighting off these white lions, killing one of them, and then in the process, Taka sees what's going on, is too much of a wuss to do anything about it, so he runs back to the rest of the pride and just does nothing. Like, he doesn't even warn the rest of the pride about it because they don't come to help or anything. They're just hanging out there, and then Mufasa and Taka's mom come walking up and they say, "Oh, Mufasa is the one that saved me." Meanwhile, Taka's dad, the king, just kind of tells Taka, "Well, we got to lie about this because we want to make sure that you look good, because you have to be king, and being king sometimes means you got to lie because that's what you just need to do." They realize that the white lions are probably going to wind up coming after the whole pride, so Taka's a little protective of his son, just says, "You know what, you go ahead and take off, and Mufasa, you have to protect my son and swear fealty to him and make sure that he becomes the true king," despite the fact that the king had completely crapped on Mufasa his entire life. So they take off running. Apparently the white lions swoop in to destroy that entire pride, which they don't really focus on that much. It's just kind of happens in the background, and there's not even any real drama or intensity about the situation. They're out on the run. They run into Sarabi and Zazu out of nowhere and then immediately decide to travel with them. There's no setup as to their relationship, how they interact with each other. It just immediately happens. They do nothing to establish relationships in this movie. It's just, hey, another lion and a bird popped up. Cool, let's just walk together then. Straight up, the writers just had to have said, all right, Mufasa gets separated from his parents, meets Scar as a kid, and then maybe Scar's family dies, so they have to go on the run, but they probably meet Sarabi and Zazu along the way. And they didn't really figure out any way to properly set that up. Then, while they're walking together, it randomly cuts to a tree filled with monkeys, and Rafiki's there, and he is just ostracized by the group, which we get almost no context about. They give about 5 seconds of exposition about why they just don't like him because he's a bit of a fortune teller, and then they kick him out. Again, no setup, no establishment. So Rafiki starts walking along, and then the lions just pop up and say, "Oh, we're gonna eat you." And Rafiki says, "No, you're not. I'm just gonna walk to this promised land called Malele." And Mufasa says, "Oh, Malele, I know that place. Okay, I guess we'll all walk together." To which Taka immediately responds, "Wait, we're not gonna eat him? I'm kind of hungry." But everybody just kind of ignores that, and they all just move along because, again, no setup, no establishment. They just happen to know about the same place. So cool, we're all good with it. It's almost like in Batman v Superman when Superman mentions Martha. So all of a sudden everything's cool. They keep walking along. Taka mentions he probably has a crush on Sarabi for whatever reason, despite the fact we have almost no context other than him looking at her in a particular way. But he wants Mufasa's help in picking her up. And Mufasa tries to be a good wingman by using his super powered smell ability and telling him that she has some special flowers in her homeland, so go talk to her about them. And of course, Taka doesn't do very well with this, despite the fact that Mufasa's super-powered smell was trying to help him out. Yes, that actually happened. They keep traveling along. The white lions almost catch up to them until Sarabi winds up causing an elephant stampede that knocks her out in the process. And of course, Mufasa saves her, but tries to still be a good wingman, so tells her that Taka is actually the one that saved her, despite the fact that during the whole stampede thing, Taka was being a scared little wuss and hiding underneath some rocks. Then they continue to try and escape the white lions, wind up in a snowy mountaintop, and the white lions lose track of them in the process. And then that night, Mufasa is using his superpowered senses to sense some food for them to eat, and then all of a sudden, Sarabi realizes that his superpowered senses are probably how they figured out the flowers from her homeland, and then realizes that he was probably the one who saved her. And then they have a whole romantic scene, despite the fact that he's trying to be a good wingman at first, and then he finally gives in. Taka winds up seeing this from afar, gets really pissy about it, and then kind of listens to that message from his dad about being a good liar and decides to hide the fact that he's actually going to go over to the White Lions and tell them he's going to help them find this promised land, as well as help them kill Mufasa. The main crew finally makes it to Malele, and immediately a bunch of animals run up to Mufasa, say, "Hey, Mufasa, you led the White Lions here and it's your fault." And they establish zero relationship with the other animals here, which is kind of important because as soon as the White Lion shows up to try and challenge him to a fight, he turns to the other animals and says, "Let's all band together and fight them together." But they have no reason to give a crap because nothing has been established. But for once, that doesn't kick in, at least not immediately. He goes to fight the main White Lion, and it's revealed that Taka wound up selling him out. Mufasa winds up fighting him, and during that fight, Sarabi winds up running off to try and get help from other animals and other lions, randomly finds some other lions who are apparently forced out of their own homes by the White Lions, which were given almost no context about and no establishment there again. And Zazu tries to get some help from the other animals, despite the fact they've done absolutely nothing to earn their trust in any way, shape, or form. And during the fight that Mufasa is having with this big old white lion, he knocks that lion off a ledge and it gets injured. But instead of going down, finishing the fight, and ending this goddamn movie, he winds up deciding to take a break, walking over and trying to give a big speech to the other animals, which again, they've done almost nothing to earn the trust of these random animals, yet he is just expecting this to happen, and of course it does, because the writers didn't want to do any work to actually establish any relationships or trust between characters at all. Then Mufasa decides to go down and try to continue the fight in this random cavern pit thing. But now that the White Lion has had a bit of time to get a bit of a breather while he was doing that speech, he is fully recovered and is dominating the fight. And Taka finally comes to his senses, decides to step in to try and save Mufasa, and in the process earns himself that infamous scar. They team up to start fighting the White Lion, and then because there's no other way for them to figure out how to progress the fight, out of nowhere there's an earthquake, which creates Pride Rock somehow, and it forces the ground to open up, forcing Mufasa and the White Lion to fall into an underground pool of water, where Mufasa's super senses give him super underwater sonar powers, where he is able to suddenly detect that a giant rock is falling through the water, so he kicks the White Lion into the path of it, killing the White Lion and saving himself, winning the fight. Seriously, I am not making that part up. They even have like the visual effect of seeing sonar like they did in Aquaman. Taka winds up helping him out of the water with a very infamous digging his claws into Mufasa's paws thing when he killed Mufasa in the original Lion King, which they've hinted at like 3 or 4 times throughout this movie at this point. And then Mufasa takes his place as king, randomly meets his mom again, for the first time since the beginning of the movie, and then decides he's so done with Taka, he can never say his name again. So Taka tells him, "You can just call me Scar then," which is weird because it's like, yeah, stop calling me Garbage, which is literally my name, and call me Scar instead. It was not written well. And they basically skip any establishment of any characters whatsoever. And it's a almost 2-hour movie. So they had time to put all this stuff in. They could have set up actual relationships between him and Taka, or actual conflict between him and Taka's dad, the old king. And they could have probably skipped huge chunks to spend some time establishing a relationship between Mufasa and Sarabi, or maybe earning the trust of the animals in Malele. But instead, they padded it all out with a bunch of random crap. And what made it even worse is the second major problem I had, which is it feels like they wanted to trimmed down the time because it was getting too long, but they did it in the worst way possible by literally cutting off the emptiness of any conversation. And what I mean by this is that anytime two characters are talking, there is zero breaks between what one person says and another. So it means there's no chance for, even with CG, for there to be any sort of emotional reaction of any kind. Literally, when he is talking to Scar at the end of the movie, he says, I can't even call you by your name anymore. All right, then call me Scar. Okay. And like, it happens almost that quickly. There is no breaks. There is no deep moment of him introspecting and feeling what's going on and that there might be some actual emotion there. Nope. No time for that. We got to get this movie wrapped up. And even right after that situation happens, Sarabi pops up and immediately jumps into the conversation, leading it somewhere else entirely. So there is no break in between there. There is no time for any actual emotion. There is no time for anybody to feel anything in this entire movie. They try to do random callbacks with the zoom in to the scared lion cub that happens with the stampede / water rushing. They try to do a quick callback with the claws digging into the other paws of Mufasa thing. But they don't take half a second for a character to just feel upset about something or to react when somebody is saying something to them. It's like conversations happen without any breath in between anything. It's like if somebody said, you should be king. No, I shouldn't. There's no moment for a character to process anything that somebody said. Instead, somebody should say, you should be king. No, I shouldn't. Like, take a moment, take a breath, allow a character to process something or show any emotion on a character's face. I know it's terrible CG that was forced down our throats, but at least allow them to voice act it, for God's sake. And I could not stop seeing it because it happened so early and it did not stop happening throughout the entirety of the movie. It was like they wanted to cut out every minute second they possibly could in between when one person delivered a line and when another person delivered a line. They didn't want anybody to react. They didn't even want anybody to take a breath, to process something or allow somebody to feel like they are taking a moment to understand what another character says. And it was only amplified by the fact that they don't take a moment to allow people to establish characters or relationships throughout the entirety of this movie. The original Lion King was an hour and 28 minutes, but it at least had more impact at every step because it didn't try to force in so many random story points, and it didn't try to force in all this random crap because it took the time to develop relationships, develop the characters, and allow characters to take a damn breath. So every character was more impactful. Every relationship meant more. And anytime something actually happened that could damage a character or an emotional moment, you actually felt it as the audience. That's how storytelling works. But Disney's forgotten all that. So whatever, who cares, right? It's supposed to be a Disney movie. I shouldn't be putting that much thought into it. But at the same time, this seems to be a trend for everything Disney is putting out. But that's just my opinion. If you've seen Mufasa, I would love to know what you think about it, because obviously I was a little critical, but I just could not stop thinking about every one of these things the entire time I was watching it. In fact, I saw this with my wife, and she is a big Disney fan, and she fell asleep pretty early on and didn't wake up until a while later. Just like, what the hell happened? Because she was just so not drawn into it at all. And frankly, I don't blame her. But I'd love to know what other people think. So let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to subscribe if that's your thing. But otherwise, until next time, I'm RJ.